Greetings and welcome to Writers on Writing. I am your host, Dr. Brenda Greene, and I am coming to you from the Center for Black Literature, which is located at Medgar Evers College. I'm the founder and executive director of the Center for Black Literature and director of the conference, the National Black Writers Conference, that is. And I am also a professor of English here at Medgar Evers College. This broadcast of Medgar Evers College Radio is paid for by Medgar Evers College. And I am very pleased to have with me in virtual space today, Dr. Tony Medina. Welcome,
Thank
Tony.
you, Dr. Greene.
It is so wonderful to have you come and talk to us about your works, your life's works, and also your most recent books. And I just want to share with our audience some information about you. Okay. Tony Medina is the author, editor of 20 books for adults and young readers, including the graphic novel, I Am Alfonso Jones. We'll be talking about that today. And 13 Ways of Looking at a Black Boy, the Shaun Days, Bum Rush the Page, a Deaf Poetry Jam, Love to Lanston, Roll Call, a generational anthology of social and political literature and art, Committed to Breathing, and the follow-up letters to Santa from kids who never got a response. He has been featured in several documentaries with writers. His poetry and fiction have been in numerous anthologies. He's done numerous presentations across the country. He is the first professor of creative writing at Howard University. And so he's really done well, and he's really someone who crosses so many genres because he writes essays, children's literature, young adult literature, and of course his love of poetry. And just want to share
Langston and Amiri, broad range, and Ishmael,
That's right. His mentees. The books, Roll Call, a generation anthology of social and political literature, and Bum Rush the Page, a Deaf Poetry Jam. We actually used in our literature program for youth. It's called Re-envisioning Our Lives Through Literature. So we bought those books and used excerpts from those books. They were so timely, and they're still very timely. It's
like
They loved it. They created their own poems, their skits, their stories.
I feel about Medgar Evers College. It's a great place. It's very right in the middle of the Caribbean world in New York City.
Caribbean world, and
committed to the center of the universe.
Right. Thank you, and committed to social justice and to making sure that our students remain activists and know their culture and their heritage, and that's what we do at the Center for Black Literature. But the radio show allows us to hear writers talk about their work, their lives, and their craft. And so I want to begin by asking you to tell us about the Shaun Days. Not the Shaun Days.
I Am Alfonso Jones.
I am, yeah. You know what?
That was a nice sandwiching of Deshaun and Alfonso Jones.
Deshaun and Alfonso, yeah.
Yeah, I really love that character.
Yeah, you wrote this. This is a graphic novel. So what was the motivation?
Graphic novel. Well, the motivation was that we were having such a rash of incidents of police brutality in our communities across the country, and in other parts of the world where, the Black and the brown are trying to do our thing in the world, in Babylon. And I just felt compelled. I was doing a lot of Facebook posting and getting all of my ideas and my anger out and frustration out. So, the graphic novel allowed me to really do the stuff that I do in poetry and fiction, but meld it together with, graphic storytelling. So Alfonso Jones is a character that I created who is born in the Bronx, right? But is raised in Harlem. And I think this is a redundant term, but he's a Black Puerto Rican 16-year-old kid He's very academically, high achieving. He's very talented. So he gets to go to, well, he's born in adverse conditions. Like the first 20 pages, Dr. Greene really explores a lot of his life. It sets the tone for what's to come. But he's very high achieving. He is born in some adverse conditions, which I won't give away, but he's raised by his father, who's like a Black preacher, a reverend who has his own church, but in the liberation, like kind of like Reverend Daughtry of Brooklyn and stuff, like that type of cat. He's a revolutionary, he's an activist, but he's also a Christian preacher, and he has a church. So his mother wants him to be raised in Harlem so that he can have a father figure, because, in the beginning, he loses his father, whatever.
Right, his father, right.
So he goes to this school in Harlem called Henry Dumas.
Yes, I love it. Love it.
So there's so much in here with regard to the culture, with regard to our belief systems, Yoruba, Santeria, and all that stuff. It's rich in all that, but it's about the 6-year-old kid who gets killed by the police while he's shopping for his first suit for his father's release from prison, who got exonerated after 15 years behind bars on something he didn't do. But prior to that, he leaves the safe confines of his Harlem hood with his best friend and secret crush, Donetta Jimenez, and they go to this Midtown store called Marksman's, and he's trying out suits, and in the process, he gets mistaken for somebody holding up a gun, and then he's killed, and literally he's yanked out of his body, his spirit, and he ends up on this ghost train in Harlem, where he encounters a lot of folks that have been killed by the police, and it kind of takes on a life of its own from there. Him finding out how that happened to him.
Yeah, you put so much, like you said, you have all of the civic, the historical leaders, you have the poetry, you have the music, you put it all there. And you could use the rap, the hip hop, I thought of Def Poetry Jam, and I mean, it's all there. You pack it in. So what? I was
able to do a lot in that form. It was an exciting form, and I had to learn on my own how to do it. I had to hit the ground running once I signed that contract. Right. But it was a great challenge, and I was a little nervous along the way, but once I got close to the finish line, when you have working in your institution, you have all these people in a team. I had a team and stuff, so it was in.
Right. So tell us a little bit about the team, because I was wondering what came first, the graphics or the text? Script. Are you doing it?
You have to do a script.
You have to do a script, and then she went back. Your illustrator. No,
it's my illustrator. I have 2 illustrators, right? Stacey Robinson is the brother, who's a fantastic artist, right. And John Jennings. It just so happens that Stacey Robinson was John Jennings' student, right? So John Jennings was illustrating the Octavia Butler Kindred adaptation that Damian Duffy did. Damian Duffy came on as my what do you call it? The person who does the words, the letterer. He did the lettering and stuff like that, which is an art form unto itself. And because John Jennings was doing 240 pages, of the Kindred graphic novel adaptation, he even blew out his arm trying to do all that art. He had Stacey take the lead and do the lead penciling. John came in as the inker. So, and him, all of them, Damian Duffy, Stacey Robinson, John Jennings, and our intrepid editor publisher, Stacy Whitman. That's what I'm talking about in terms of a team, But
it was parallel. You had written it, but you were going back and forth the entire time, I imagine.
Well, I wrote it first. Initially, I wanted a woman of color to do the art, just to have a gender balance or whatever. But the person that we gave it to sat on it like a Fabergé egg for months or whatever, then decided that It was too personal, which I read to be like, oh, she didn't want to do this heavy duty political racial stuff. So my editor, publisher, Stacy Whitman, she knew of John Jennings's work and stuff like that, and where he was teaching at the time in Albany, I think. And she reached out to him. And when she introduced me to the two fellas and their work, I was like, wow, they're right up my alley. And I kind of knew who John Jennings was. We had mutual people in common. So it was just a good,
a good mix. It's interesting how that book is still so relevant right now. And you had Brian Stevenson write the foreword.
Yeah, initially I was trying to get Ava DuVernay, but she was so busy. And Haile Gerima, the great Haile Gerima filmmaker, was trying to make that connection happen. But she was doing too many things at the same time, so she couldn't really do it. So then my publisher got Brian Stevens to do, which was really great.
What has been the reception for this book? I mean, I think it's so relevant. I can imagine many people wanting it in the curriculum, or people in different.
Well, when it first came out, it was doing really well. It came out October 2017. We launched it at New York Comic Con, Poets House, and at Langston Hughes's crib up in Harlem, where Renee Watson turned it into like an institution and stuff. After it was, somebody lived there for a long time, and Dave Mills, the writer, lived there. I remember visiting Dave one time, and it was like, I'm in Langston's crib, which was 8 blocks from where I lived, in Harlem. So, in the beginning, it was really well. I mean, you had Hollywood people running after me and stalking me. And then it picked up another life of its own during the summer that we had the Black Lives Matter and the pandemic.
Yes, I can imagine, yes.
The murder of George Floyd, and then Breonna Taylor, and then the brother who was jogging in Georgia. I forgot his name. His name escapes me right now, but so then it became like a bestseller on Barnes & Noble's graphic novels, which was like, wow. I used to work at Barnes & Noble's. Now I'm on the bestseller.
That's wonderful. That's great. So how does this writing the graphic novel, or how does this book really align with your other work? And of course I know the answer to that, but your work has always been very political, very oriented towards social justice issues, towards activism, always centered in Blackness. Can you talk a little bit about your other work and what your worldview is on what you write and why you write the books you do?
Well, in that type of aesthetic that I find myself doing, it's not anything that's false or inauthentic. That's the way I communicate. That's the way I make sense of what's happening, under capitalism, under racism, the colorism, all these things. So with regard to I Am Alfonso Jones and this type of medium, I mean, I was already in love with the marriage between artwork and text. That was my attraction to children's picture books and stuff like that, which I didn't have any of those books when I was a child. I wasn't surrounded by books growing up. But as I got into an adult, I really was fascinated by this and I wanted to do it. And, Langston Hughes was doing it. And I was like, this is fascinating. But, I get to do that and my poetry and do storytelling in the form of a graphic novel, which in the case of this book, I was able to kind of get a lot of my ideas out. It was a fascinating form to learn and to accomplish, to tackle, and then working with these artists. That was just another joy. Even with the letter, when Damien did the lettering and stuff, it just took it to another level. And I'm the kind of guy that I do my best revising or tweaking of a manuscript when it's already laid out. And then I could read it and really feel it and get the sense of the rhythm. And then I could start tweaking, taking words out, cutting the fat and getting into the rhythm of the story. But with a graphic novel, there's 2 stories being told. The text and then the visuals.
So what if you had to describe to us what your whole philosophy around writing is, As I said, why do you write? What motivates you to write? You know, I always think about John Oliver Killen's The Social Responsibility of the Writer. You know, you have to be long distance runners, and you know, there's a guiding force that's motivating you to write.
I don't know, it brings me the most joy and it gives me purpose. I really, you know, that's a heavy question because I really cannot see myself out of being a writer or a poet, or, you know, somebody creative with language or whatever. Because I would be like, what would be the use? You know, getting up in the morning, whatever. I don't think I could just exist. So it just allows me to, whatever's running around in my head, in my imagination, it allows me to bring it out. And it's a vehicle to do that with the writing, you know, or whatever platform or medium I'm tackling or genre.
So as you look back over the 20 plus books that you've done in various genres, what has been the highlights for you? What have been the most significant to you as a writer?
Well, I think the first highlight probably, I mean, outside of like having my first poetry book put out by Harlem River Press, the great Glenn Thompson, the late great Glenn Thompson, was probably doing the Mumia anthology with S.E. Anderson, Sam Anderson, who's in Brooklyn now, and you know Sam, because that was like taking my activism and my literary stuff and putting it together and having that be a functional piece where the money was going towards something. So that was a nice marriage. I think the next one would possibly be having my first children's book come out. And you mentioned it before, Shaun Days. And Shaun is, you know, I have a cousin named Shaun, so I copped the name from that. And my other cousin, Tiffany, she makes an appearance as Shaun's cousin and somewhat sister, because they live together. And he's from the projects and stuff. And I really didn't see any children's books out there at the time where, I mean, it's middle-class Black children, but not someone from the projects like me. I come from the Throsneck housing projects. So I wanted to see that representation. And then I would say Bum Rush the Page was kind of cool because it was a big thing. Roll Call was very challenging and very enriching. And I like to do anthologies because I like to put all these people out there, you know, and younger people too, and, you know. But Resisting Arrest, which is this book right here, it's Poems and Church Society. It's an anthology that deals with police brutality. So a lot of stuff I've been doing. And then I would say I Am Alfonso Jones, of course, which is like my most recent favorite. And it looks like that.
Wonderful cover, yes.
And has some great quotes, particularly from Nikki Giovanni, my homegirl. And 13 Ways of Looking at a Black Boy is very special to me. And it features 13 dynamic artists of color. And this one is all in Tanka, 13 Tanka. And it has this introductory poem that shows the beauty and the humanity of Black boys. And I was doing that book simultaneously that I'm Alfonso Jones. And the reason why it was just, I was getting sick and tired of us being killed and brutalized or undermined. And we always have to acknowledge and say to the world or our society that we're human, you know, just show it, you know, like that Langston Hughes poem that shames America and say, you know, I'm beautiful and I'm intelligent and blah, blah. And one day you're going to, you know, I'll be in the back sitting and one day I'm going to sit in the front and eat. Right. And you're going to feel ashamed because you're going to see how beautiful I am, right. You know.
Right. I want you to think about whether you want to share a poem. And as you think about that, you can describe what is your writing process? Again, you know, for someone who's writing in these different genres, and you always see music and you talked about art, everything impacts your writing. What is your writing process and who's your audience?
Brenda, you asked hard questions. The writing process varies, but I tell you one thing, I really work well when I have a contract. Impose deadlines and stuff, because, you know, we tend to want to chill. we tend to want to chill hard sometimes and we waste a lot of time. But when I'm working, let's say on Alfonso Jones, my process was, and also the children's books, I have to kind of figure out the form. And by figuring out the form, I'm going to have to immerse myself in that form and read everything, So I'm going to read a lot of children's books. I'm going to read a lot of graphic novels and comics, and then I'm going to try to read books on how to do them. There's no set form, so I got to figure out what's going to work for me. And it's this dance that you do with the artist. So it's me communicating directly with the artist, creating a script. So that's another thing. Poetry, it could be anything, like when your boy Freddie Gray was killed in Baltimore by the police, and they got him in a chokehold and broke his neck basically and dumped him in the back of this pickup truck. I was so incensed, and I was looking at the news repeatedly, and it was just in my head. When I went to bed, I woke up with this stuff, and it was that a poem was percolating, coming out of me. That with the notion of this other brother who was handcuffed in the back of a police car, who ended up with a gunshot to his chest with the stippling and all that stuff. And they ruled it the ME ruled it a suicide. So I took all that, and that became, a poem that basically talks about the magic Negro, the Black Houdini who basically kills themselves, miraculously, even though they're handcuffed or whatever, or their neck is broken.
That comes out in Alfonso Jones too, that whole concept, yeah.
And let's say I went to a funeral of the great Tato Laviera, the Black Boricua, the Afro-Puerto Rican poet, one of the heads of the New York Poets Cafe. And it was unlike a funeral I've been to, except for in my family, where it was a celebration of life. And it was like, salsa, jazz, santeria, all this stuff melded into one. So you left so high and exuberant that a poem came off of that experience. So
part of what I hear you doing is that you look at the images and what you're surrounding yourself with, you think about that, and then that becomes the motivation for writing.
I don't know. I think it just, how things seep into your psyche, and then it just comes out when it's ready.
Yes. Particularly after you have some time to reflect on it. But as we come to a close, what message do you have for writers? Because you're working at Howard University, you're teaching creative writing and literature. So what message do you have for emerging writers and particularly, I guess, for poets, children's writers?
Well, I love that Bob Marley song where they say something, you got to have something to say. And in order to have something to say, you have to be observant, you have to study, meaning you have to dip into that tradition that comes before you and read and study, but also, embrace artwork, embrace, language and everyday people, be observant, listen to the music, pay attention to what's happening in the world, in the news. And those things would just come out kind of naturally, but also you have to be disciplined enough to make the time to write. So read a lot, engage in art, other art forms, be a people person, pay attention to people, be observant. All great artists, even, stand-up comedians, is all about, observing and notating things, and keep a journal on hand. A notebook and a pen. Don't rely on these devices because, if they go out, then you out of luck.
That's right. So you're emphasizing the craft. And so I want to encourage our listening audience to go and check out the work of Tony Medina. His most recent work is I Am Alfonso Jones. And, sometimes almost tears came to my eyes as I was reading it. Some of the images you created on what this, and 13 ways of looking at a Black boy, what our Black men are going through. It was just very, very moving. You really captured it.
Yeah.
Well, yes, Black women, of course, too, but you just really captured it. And when you look at what's going on in this country politically, you are emphasizing how this is still important. We still have to tell these stories. So I thank you for
I want to just
your post on that.
If I have one more second, I'll just hit you with this one. You could just cut this out if it's too much time, but this is right up the alley what you're talking about. And this is brother Stefan Clark, who was literally killed in his grandmother's backyard in California. And this will be a different tone. It opens with Harry and Jacob saying, "There are wrongs which even the grave does not bury." Stefan Clark. "There'll be time enough for blood blooming petals peeled from overfed flesh. A late night stroll, patrolling the petunias in grandma's garden. No need for patios light haloed by flies, spider webs, and moths flailing away as if drowning in midair. Oh, who could tell in all that dark grass shifting beneath flat feet? Who could tell the silhouette in the dark framed by starlight and distant windows? Who could tell a body from a target study at night? There'll be time enough for blood blooming petals pierced with lead-fed flesh. The skin in the garden of breathing, of being black in all that black. What falls is not paradise, but 12 bullet shells, the rest buried in the back, dislodged out the chest, blooming petals of blood in the garden of no more breathing, of blackness leaving."
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for the work you do. And you have been listening to Writers on Writing with Dr. Tony Medina. Please check out his website, tonymedina.com, right? tonymedina.com.
Tony Medina, I think .org, yeah.
.org, tonymedina.org. And remember, the writer's always reading, the reader is always writing. Keep reading and writing. Empower yourselves as readers and writers. This Medgar Evers College radio show is paid for by Medgar Evers College. Thank you for tuning in.